NFL free agency. And we're going to remember back to last summer when we were talking about the running backs, whether or not they should get paid. Obviously, if NFL free agency has started and we've started to see running backs get paid. Does that mean what we said last summer is wrong? What have we learned? We'll talk all about it. And then the second thing that I'm sipping on, I'm going to go through. I went to Salt Lake City about a week ago for 24 hours, and I'm just going to recap the Salt Lake City trip. So let's go ahead. Let's start sipping. Hit the music. NFL free agency has begun. It's a very exciting time. It feels a little extra exciting this year, actually, with the increase in the NFL salary cap. We saw last year it was at $225 million. Going into 2024, they increased that $30 million. That's now up to $255 million. And so I'd say today has kind of felt a little more like NBA free agency. There's not a time that I would argue often that the NFL needs to copy the NBA, because clearly the NFL knows what they're doing when it comes to marketing their product and generating fan interest. But the NBA has definitely been king when it comes to free agency and bringing up the hype around that. And we've kind of seen that already with NFL free agency this year. Just last night, we saw Russell Wilson sign with the Steelers. Today, we saw Kirk Cousins to the Falcons is now official. Looks like with that deal, he will now, with his career, earn over $400 million if he lasts the entire stint of this new contract he just signed. Probably, honestly, as I'm taping this, more NFL free agency signings will be released. It seems like just about every 15 minutes we've seen something new come across the docket. But all of this NFL free agency stuff, it has me reminiscing on one of the biggest arguments that we saw happen before the NFL season. And that was just a general argument of, should I pay my running back? Do running backs even deserve to be paid? Is there ever a time when I should be excited about my team signing a running back? If I see my favorite team has now signed one of those stud guys, the guys that has name recognition that we really know, should I be excited? Well, I'll answer that last one for you. It's as simple as, if your team signed the player, then you say you're excited and yeah, your team's back. If someone else does it, then you say it's an overpay. Simple enough. We're all fans here. We know how it goes. I saw that on a flow chart today. I thought it was pretty funny and pretty accurate, honestly. But anyways, back to the original point. If you don't remember, for about 2 weeks back in the summer when training camp had started, but right before the NFL season was yet to come, we were all obsessed with this argument of, what should you do with a running back? And sure, some of it was probably just boredom and midsummer football cravings that we really wanted to see around July, but it was a bit more interesting than the typical, is Dak Prescott elite that you're going to see for the rest of the, 6 months until we see football being played again on our TVs. And it's a legitimate argument. It's something that still resonates today because I've seen all these running back signings, and it really just got me thinking. So if you think back, some of the main guys arguing for more money were guys like Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, who at the time in 2022 he had led the league in rushing. Then there was Jonathan Taylor. He was held out a while before he ultimately signed a deal to return to the Colts. And I just wanted to take those three guys. Those seemed like they were dominating the headlines at this time last year. If we look back at what they did this past season, so there was Josh Jacobs. He ended up only playing 13 games. He had half the rushing yards and half the touchdowns that he had in 2022. Look at Saquon Barkley. He played in 14 games. He had 400 fewer yards, and he had 4 fewer touchdowns. Then you look at Jonathan Taylor. He ended up only playing in 10 games because he held out for a while, and then he had some injury history that flared up again, and ultimately he finished the season having been outrushed by Zach Moss, the guy that the Colts kind of just brought in as, we'll see what he can do, but we don't expect anything. He ended up outperforming the guy that they ended up paying. So if you take the overall running back market, the stats are still the same as what we were seeing last year. If we look at it from a supply and demand standpoint, just basic economics, there's a constant refresh of talent each year throughout the NFL draft. So in 2023, we saw 18 running backs drafted. In 2022, we saw 23 were drafted. Go back one more year, in 2021, we saw 20 were drafted. That's 61 total running backs in a 3-year span. And it's essentially saying that each team has drafted around 2 running backs over that short of a time frame. If you look over to quarterbacks, the guys that are getting paid, the guys that probably deserve the contract, if we're being honest, it was half of that number over the same time frame. In fact, only in 2022, only 9 quarterbacks were drafted. Then if you look at career expectancy, so the running back average NFL career expectancy is right around 2.5 years. That's lowest in the entire NFL. Of course, this number includes all the running backs, and the average is a little higher for the more productive guys, the guys with the name recognition, the guy you have the jersey of, the ones that you know and love. Those are the ones that are going to be paid. But if you compare that 2.5 years over to the next skill position average, so that would be the wide receivers, they're at 2.8 years average NFL career expectancy. That's just a third of a year difference from a position that gets paid well, and you rarely hear arguments of them being underpaid. And this is because it's a simple fact of that's where the game has trended. If you look back years ago, the running backs were king. You had to have a good running back to win anything of significance. The game was played through the ground, not through the air, and that's just not the case anymore. It's a quarterback-driven league played through the passing game. And people argue, well, no, if you have Patrick Mahomes, then yeah, it's a passing league. But if you don't, then you want to win a Super Bowl, you're going to need a star running back. And the last 5 Super Bowl champs without Mahomes, yeah, their starting running backs wouldn't signify that at all. It was Sony Michel with the Rams, Ronald Jones with Tampa Bay, Sony Michel again with the Patriots, and then LeGarrette Blount twice, once with Philly and once with New England. If you're wondering how those careers are going, they are now all out of the NFL. In football, trending towards a specific play style, that's not new. Just think about basketball and you'll see the same kind of thing. I think of Zach Edey. He's been the best player in college basketball for 2 years now. He's all but a lock to win his 2nd consecutive National Player of the Year award. That'll be the first time that's happened since 1982, when Ralph Sampson went on to ultimately win 3 in a row. Then you look over at Zach Edey's draft stock, and you see an entirely different story of a dominant player that's dominated the college basketball scene for 2 years now. The dude could legit go undrafted. He's 7'4", he averages 24 points a game, 11 rebounds. He's nearly unguardable, and he might not even have a shot at playing in the league. And that's all about how sports have trended. And I'm not even saying that I like that it's trended this way. It's fun to root for electric running backs. It's fun to root for that kind of football. It's fun to root for dominant big men in basketball. I'll draft these guys first round in my fantasy drafts next year, and behind a good quarterback, they're probably the first guys I'm lining up to buy a jersey for. But the business side of sports is and always will be brutal. And my point is this. We've seen plenty of running back free agent moves to kick off this NFL season here in March. In fact, we've already seen 8 major guys sign. We saw Josh Jacobs go to the Packers. Saquon, he moved over to the Eagles. Tony Pollard went to the Titans. DeAndre Swift to the Bears. Eckler to the Commanders. All this early movement, big money contracts. It had me really wondering, has something changed since we last discussed this? And I settled on 2 conclusions. The first is this. Do we not see it as a bit symbolic that a lot of these running backs are finding new teams for next year? And if the running backs argument was that they were super valuable long term, how come now the teams are kind of like, nah, I'll let someone else pay your bill? And the second argument. If ultimately you as a running back, your argument is, I really need to be paid more because if I keep playing without a long-term deal, I'll probably get hurt and I'll end up using a lot of PTO. Oh, also, by the way, I'm very replaceable. You'll probably find someone cheaper, younger, and better than me in your next hiring cycle. That's just not a good argument for me to want to pay you. Salt Lake City recap. I got to, I guess you could say, spend about, we'll say 29 hours in Salt Lake City. I had a work trip, and so basically it got planned the week of. I went out on a Friday and flew back on that Saturday, the very next day. Just kind of wanted to recap it. It was a very interesting trip for how quick it was. It was very eventful, and we'll take you through it real quick. So I got in at about 6. That was on Friday night. I basically wanted to spend this time just kind of sightseeing, and so I did not have any work requirements until the next morning. It was supposed to be from 9 to 1. There's a little foreshadow there, as I said, supposed to be. But anyways, I land, grab my car, and very first stop that I want to make, I knew that Salt Lake City was the home of East High, where the High School Musical was filmed. I was a big High School Musical fan back in the day. Still kind of am a High School Musical fan. And so that was definitely something that I wanted to see. And so very first stop, I punch in High School Musical, East High on the GPS. And I very quickly noticed that anything that I would put in the GPS, it was warning me, hey, there's a high wind warning. It was a little bumpy landing the plane, and the wind was clearly here to stay. So anything that I was putting in, it was warning me that, yes, it may be 60 degrees and warm out, but the wind is definitely going. And so I hop on the highway. I also start to see signs that say, hey, there's going to be snow on the roads at 1 p.m. on Saturday. That was on every highway that I went on in Salt Lake City. They were definitely, the maps were concerned with the wind, and the signs all around, the electronic signs on the highway, definitely concerned about the snow that was coming. But made my way to East High. Very cool. Definitely lived up to the hype. I also learned when looking up on the GPS that in Salt Lake City there's a West High. I can't imagine back in the, 2010s or whenever High School Musical came out, can't imagine how big of a loser you would feel if you went to West High when you knew that East High was right down the road. But East High, very cool. Took pictures in front of it. Went all the way to the back of the school, and I was able to see in the cafeteria where they sung Status Quo. It was, I don't know, I've always loved that kind of thing. It's very cool. One of the things that I went on, one of my favorite vacations early on in my life was when I went to San Diego, got to see the Warner Bros. Studios, got to see the set of Friends, got to see the set of The Mentalist, shows that I've loved. So overall, just seeing where those big things have been filmed, always been something that I've been very intrigued with. So that was an awesome experience. Very next stop, I also, whenever I go to a new place, I love being able to see universities in the area, colleges in the area. And if you know Salt Lake City well, that is where the University of Utah is. In fact, from East High, you can practically see the University of Utah. So obviously, as the sports fan I am, I punched in their football stadium. It was only a 4-minute drive, so I whipped over there real quick. Again, very windy. And got there, parked. There was a big Paralympic Games monument outside of their football stadium. That was pretty cool. I learned that they were the host of the 2002 Winter Paralympics. Those were in March of 2002, and I was reading up on the monument, so I guess that was one of the first major world events after 9/11. And so the monument described how there was kind of this sense of fear that everyone had of having that many people in one place, but then at the same time there was just so much national pride at that time, so it was very cool to be able to pull off the event. I walked all around the football stadium, continued on my way, found my way to the north end zone, where two interesting things happened. So the first of them, I was just standing outside their north end zone, basically just taking a video, soaking it all in, and out came a guy from their north end zone, and he was like, "Hey, you trying to break in here?" Just joking with me, and I was like, "No, just a big college football fan. Just wanted to see what all it was like, and I'm only here for 24 hours, so just soaking in what I can." He was like, "Oh, where are you from?" So I told him I was from Chicago, and he's walking away at this point. He's like, "Chicago? Hey, don't let the Bears draft that frickin' Caleb Williams guy. He's a crybaby." I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, the Pac-12 may be dead, but there's still some Pac-12 hatred of the Caleb Williams, and it will be interesting to see if he ultimately ends up being the number one pick, which I expect him to be. But thought that was a funny story. Second thing I learned, he was coming out of the north end zone because they actually use their stadium as a revenue generator. And so even in the off season, they turn it into a restaurant. They have it as like a club. You can join a membership. Thought this was a very interesting thing. Very easy way to make some extra NIL money. Something that if I lived in the campus of my college town, I would definitely still want to do. Friday night at the football stadium, get a nice meal in. Thought that was a very cool thing. That ended night one, so go to my hotel, start day two. That's the day where I have my work event. So what I was there for was I was there for a baseball bat demo day. That was for Shields. I hadn't heard of Shields before I started working for Wilson, but it is another sporting goods retailer. They've got about 32 locations across the U.S. And so basically from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., they had rented out this baseball training facility. You would get to try out a bat in one of the batting cages. If you like it and you were there, then you would get 20% off at the Shields store that day. So the wind returns. Wind is still howling. Temperatures are kind of starting to drop a little bit, but the wind was definitely there. Once again, hopped in the car from the hotel, driving over to this baseball facility, and the GPS is warning me like, hey, there's high winds. So get there. From 9 to 10, the event goes well. Seeing kids hitting bats. It's a very cool facility. It's 3 stories. There's batting cages on every single one. So at one point around 10, I go downstairs. I'm watching some smaller kids hit some USA bats down in the basement. And all of a sudden, super loud pop. Lights out. Completely black in this basement. There's no windows. There's no exterior light down there, so I'm weaving my way through the batting cages. There's Shields employees are like, hey, don't swing the bats, like no one can see anything. I make my way upstairs trying to find like the event coordinator, and eventually they're kind of in a panic state too, like what exactly is going on. Eventually someone walks out in the parking lot to see like, is there something out there I can see? And there it was. The power line right outside had fallen down in the parking lot. The fire department was called. They were so we heard sirens coming. They were on their way. They eventually made it. Obviously, everyone was worried about live electricity just laying in the parking lot. So eventually, the event was canceled after only an hour. So I decided, okay, I'll do some more sightseeing in the time that I'm supposed to be here working. Ultimately, I was only there for about an hour and a half. A little bit of a fail from the work side, but good trip sightseeing wise. So continued on. I went to City Creek Shopping Mall. It's the most modern, clean mall that I've ever seen. Everything in Salt Lake City feels like it was built in the last 4 years. There's a creek running through this mall with live fish. There's a retractable roof for the summertime. It was just an unreal experience. Everyone says that malls are dying. That mall was thriving. They are nowhere close to dying. And continued on a little bit more. Left the mall. Within my reach, I saw that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, their corporate headquarters was there. And so I was like, sure, I'll go check out their campus. The church seems to run the city. They do quite well. They're in an entire skyscraper, essentially, is their corporate office with multiple buildings surrounding it as well. Definitely doing well. Then hopped in the car again, drove up to the state capitol, and it's a very, very cool layout there. They've got the state capitol kind of looking down at the entire city. It's at the highest point of Salt Lake City. And once again, the church kind of pops up there. Although that it's the highest point in Salt Lake City overlooking the rest of the city, the first thing that you see when you look down is a church, which is ironic. And it kind of transitions directly into an interesting article that I read. It was from Front Office Sports. I saw it on March 5th, so just a few days after I'd returned from my trip. And basically this article it went through a Utah bill that is headed to the governor's desk right now, and essentially it would return Utah student athletes back to the days of the NCAA rules, not the NIL rules that we know today, and it would require Utah student athletes to report any deal over $600 to their university. And additionally, any deals that would be, promoting alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, e-cigarettes, vaping, controlled substances, gambling, and quote-unquote sexually oriented businesses, those would not be allowed. And a lot of these, I don't think they will matter much at all. For example, I can't imagine there are a lot of athletes that even would want to promote cigarette or vaping companies. That just feels wrong from the point of an athlete. But gambling, it's nearly impossible to go to an athletic event, let alone to watch an athletic event, without gambling at this point. Even if you aren't a gambler yourself, I very, very little, dabble myself in gambling, but it's still a part of the game. It's something that I check. And then, sexual content, I guess I would need further explanation. If this is saying like, hey, don't promote condoms, like, yeah, that totally makes sense. That's something to stay away from. But like, is an Instagram, thirst trap, is that considered sexual? Like there's NIL athletes all over the country that have made a living off of that. And then there's BYU, which if you don't know, it's a school right down the road from Salt Lake City, about 45 minutes south of it. Apparently, I learned they already have NIL rules that prohibit NIL deals that include sleeveless or revealing clothes, as well as no coffee, tea, or alcohol. And I'm a pretty modest guy, but I just can't see a way where this does not hurt recruiting for Utah schools overall. And it all just ties back to what I saw in my 24 hours there. And it's crazy how you can travel somewhere in the United States and, you're within the same country and it feels like an entirely different world. At the same time, I don't want to make a full-on conclusion of this is exactly how things are. Once again, I was there for 24 hours and about 8 of them were sleeping. So on the one hand, I would say I'd trust anyone that does, architecture, transportation. If they originated from Salt Lake City, Utah, they knew what they're doing. They know what they're doing. Everything was so clean. Everything ran so efficiently. No matter what, whenever I typed in the GPS, I was always just 15 minutes away from where I needed to be. Traffic was never bad. It was incredible. But then on the other hand, I don't think I've ever been to a place where a religious institution is driving the path forward for such a powerful academic institution so clearly. And it can all be summed up as this. You can just add another data point to the NIL needs at least some regulation argument. Because right now it's chaos, and I'd hate for it to ultimately harm any of my precious college athletics that I just love so much. Oh, final last thing about the trip. I met Jimmer Fredette. If anyone does not know Jimmer Fredette, he was a 2011 March Madness legend. He won 2011 National Player of the Year. One of my favorite players of all time. IU basketball was horrible at the time, so I was kind of just all in on this Jimmer Fredette guy. I was in the Salt Lake City airport terminal waiting to head back home, and I follow him on Instagram still to this day, and he walked up to the left of me. He went to BYU, so it makes sense while he was there. Walked up to the left of me, sat across from me in the terminal, and I was like, holy crap, that's Jimmer Fredette. I saw that he was eating a meal. He was with his wife, so I was like, okay, play it cool. Just wait out until he is done eating. Then you can go over, ask for a selfie. The dude electrified the nation. He was so cool. I eventually was able to time it up. He finished it up, his meal. I walked over, got a selfie with him. Great guy. Didn't take too much of his time because I didn't want to annoy him. But I had Teach Me How to Jimmer, an old YouTube song from 2011, stuck in my head for the next few days after I got home. And, they say never meet your idols. Sometimes you should meet your idols because it's pretty cool. That will do it for episode 3 of the Sip of Naderade podcast. However you found me, however you may be listening, Wherever you may be listening, I want to thank you. And for now, I hope your thirst is quenched.